Welcome to the Mystic-Skeptic radio show and podcast, the program in which we ask the tough questions and explore different alternatives to today's pressing issues, theories, or enigmas. Our show is devoted to the exploration of all things mystical, philosophical, scientific, political, conspiratorial, and cosmic. Join us in an exploration of the Mystic-Skeptic mind space. In this week's show, our guest is Cody Rhodes. He's a military medic that I met at the Buzzsprouts community. As I've been doing this show for the last 5 years, I've been struggling to have consistent guests and to really build up this podcast radio show to the point of having a recurring guest and having topics that we can discuss that are relevant. We started joking around and talking about things that we're interested in, and they did a show about aliens and conspiracies on his program, and I want to talk about that. But right now we have very crucial stuff coming our way because of the political climate, as well as just people not being familiar with terms that people are using and abusing for the sake of politics. But before we delve into the topic, I guess we can have multiple topics if we run out of ideas. It's going to be a free flow show. Can you tell us about your podcast and what is the hope of having this trio of hosts and the interaction between you guys that led to having both a video program as well as a podcast available for your listeners?
Yeah, of course. So I'm an Army medic, and my two other co-hosts, they are also Army medics, and we work together. Our podcast is called The Underqualified and Overcompensated, because as Army medics, as just being in the military, we're qualified, but we're definitely overpaid to sit and do nothing a lot of the time. So that's kind of where it just developed. Very beginning of it was me and my buddy Firth, who's also on the podcast with me. We were just kind of hitting the dirt together. We were on a 24-hour duty where we were awake for 24 hours watching ammo behind us, just sitting there all day outside, no shelter, and we were just kind of shooting the shit together. And we just started talking about politics and how people just kind of, there's either one way or the other, and we hit all these different topics from transgenderism to LGBTQ, gun rights, social political stuff, activism in Ukraine, and all sorts of different topics. And around 2 o'clock in the morning, I looked at him, I was like, we should do a podcast. And at that point, I had worked with Firth for about a year and a half or so. He was one of my soldiers. And then we pulled in our buddy Rico, who I've been with for the past 6 years. We were at Dugway Proving Grounds, Utah, which was a part of the discussion in episode 3 with aliens, because it's all top secret and, super secret squirrely. And we pulled him in. I call it the Triforce of Knowledge. So we pulled it in. I developed the whole podcast, and we just kind of hit the ground running. We tried to do as much as we could and record and try to find topics that we could hit on. Our very first episode, we didn't want to be too polarizing, not too hot button. So we decided to hit with gun control, super easy going first topic to kind of start off with. And then our main goal just kind of developed as it was going to be a political podcast, but then we kind of decided that you can't, having that one topic, you run out of a lot of places to run, right? As soon as 2020 is over and we elect our next president, what the hell are we going to talk about, right? We're going to kind of run out of things to talk about unless it comes up in the news. So we decided to kind of be more of a variety show, kind of like yours, where our mission statement is answering the questions that no one knew they had. So we wanted, we had an episode on conspiracy theories, where it's just mainly us. We're starting to get actual guests on. One of our upcoming episodes is on vampires and vampirism. So it's not really like, Blade and Twilight. We have a professor from Boston College, and he is going to be our guest. He's going to grace our screens with his knowledge. He's a professor in anthropology. So he's an actual expert in mythology and lore. and he's just going to kind of start at the beginning of vampirism and go up. And we're very excited about that podcast. And I have other experts coming in about life-changing and personality, addiction, and global warming, all sorts of different kind of stuff. So we're trying to do our best. Hopefully we can just at least make people think. That's our main point. I find I put a lot of weight on education. I love education, and I like trying to be educated. I like knowing a lot about a little, or a little about a lot and not a lot about a little, right? So I try to learn as much as I can. And so I want other people to do that as well. I want them to at least watch our episode or listen to it and be like, you know what, I didn't know that. And that's a different viewpoint, even if they don't agree with us. Because politically, socially, we're all kind of all across the board. Me, Rico, and Firth, we're all from different walks of life and, different political and social standings. And it's exciting. It's something to look forward to it every week. And, if it goes nowhere, cool, we're going to be a podcast that no one knows about, and we're going to keep recording because it's just really fun and it's nice to stay connected with each other.
Well, I wonder if we can do a critical thinking network, because we were talking about niche programming and how sometimes we might not get the attention or the audience that we want because we're jumping around with too many topics. But if people were to ask me, what is my show about? I would say that it is kind of philosophical. We talk about all kinds of different subjects, but we're also, as we delve into the subjects, we try to be objective. We try to do some critical thinking and get to the bottom of issues. Mm-hmm. And that's something that is being lost. Like with all the different programs that are available, with all the shows, with all the things that are going on, there's a sense of maybe a show like Joe Rogan is more in depth because he takes 3 hours to talk about a subject. But what everybody sees on CNN and on MSNBC and Fox News are just little clips and little opinions with no in-depth journalism, something that I would be interested in. And I guess you have to look at documentaries or certain groups that do that to really get to the bottom of some of these really controversial and difficult issues. So I think the reason that people listen to podcasts is either because they're interested in that specific subject or because they want to delve deeper into it. So when you have someone who's like a professor or an expert, then you can actually ask the questions that are in everybody else's minds. But I think that it is, again, it's like who out of all the people in the world or English speakers, how many people really care about the real history of vampires or the real history of the alien phenomenon and stuff like that? Usually people want to be told things that they already believe. And then
they want that confirmation bias.
Yeah. So when I started talking to you via Facebook, I started wondering, can we really have a discussion regarding the different political systems that are being presented? Because again, it's easy to give up and to even be scared to talk about these subjects because you assume that the other person, either based on their background or what you've heard them say, that they're going to be closed to any other idea. Because what I see in this country is that people make up their mind before even knowing much about something. Mm-hmm. And then it was funny, the last show that we did was about the state of Israel and Bernie Sanders. And one of my professors, who is a settler in one of the settlements in the West Bank, he was telling me that the reason that Israel and the Holy Land is the way it is because there's a sense of status quo, that you don't mess with the Palestinian Christians, you don't mess with the Palestinian Arabs, you don't mess with the Bedouins, and so they don't mess with you. So you have to keep things as they are, even though there might be injustices, there might be issues, people might not be allocating the resources correctly, that it's better to keep the peace and let people govern themselves within a greater system than to actually start forcing everybody to be democratic or be this or that. So when it seems like the country is being too focused on one group or the resources only going to that's kind of the style that they run things in the Middle East, that if you start coming in and bringing in new ideas, everybody doesn't know how to handle them. and it's very hard because they've been there for thousands of years. So in America, this is an experiment that we've been doing for 260 years around there.
Yeah.
And people might say, well, you just got here. I came 25 years ago from Mexico, but I'm an American. I am involved, and I feel I was happy to join this country, and then at the same time hold the country accountable. So what you hear a lot from people who are conservative or very traditionalist when it comes down to their patriotism is like it or leave it. That there is no room for improvement. And what they were saying is that when Donald Trump was running, he was tapping into that type of mentality where the U.S. is good as it is. It has had ups and downs. It's had improvements, amendments and stuff like that. But overall, the country is good, and we want to make it great again. We want to bring it back to its original roots, or the status quo that was working for everybody, and everybody was happy back then. And then the progressives talk about, let's push forward, let's keep improving and stuff like that. But what happens is that somewhere in there, we're both fighting for the same thing, but the approaches become pedantic when people want to force it. So you force us back to be in the values of the 50s that not everybody wants to live by, or force us into this futuristic world where there is no gender and there is no race and there is nothing, or they are, and they're so divided and so unique that everybody has to accept everybody with their own idiosyncrasies. And it's just so jumbled up. Like, it comes from a point where, like, you don't even want to hear anything from anybody because it's so politicized and it's so aggressive and non-helpful that it just becomes a battle of ideas. But the ideas are not even well developed and well expressed. So from your perspective, have you experienced that kind of disappointment, or is it or you feel that there is the system that you are part of is pristine and it has no room for improvement? I don't even know where you stand, but
no. So I've never really been disappointed when it came to that. I have, like I said, I love education, so I always kind of look at people and their different views as information and education. So I never shy away from a conversation, and it actually energizes me to be able to talk to someone. And I strive to find people with different views, because even if we hit that wall, that point, like you're speaking, where people just stand fast and they don't want to listen, they don't want to have anything, don't want to change anything. I like that point. And one of the great things for me is having that discussion, and I'll play devil's advocate, and I'm a gentle conversationalist, and I try to use logic more than emotion. So a lot of the people use emotion in their conversation. They're very fervent about how they feel, but they're not using logic and constructive thought. And so when I have these discussions, I try to use logic and just kind of lay it out in discussion, and not in a way to change someone's mind, but to get them to think. Because like you said, we're kind of in an era where critical thinking is not used a lot. People get that confirmation bias. They listen to who they listen to. They know where to find the information that they want, that is going to reconfirm what they believe. And it's on both sides. I kind of have the grace of kind of being in the middle ground, even with my own political and social beliefs, but just with where I work. So working in the military, and I have many civilian friends who are either on one side or the other. I grew up in Idaho, so very red state. But I have a lot of friends that are more liberal than others. And I love talking to them about stuff because I'm kind of in the middle. And in the military, we have so many different, it's the true melting pot. People say the United States is a melting pot. If the United States is a melting pot, the bottom burner, like the best, juiciest part of that melting pot is the military. of any branch, because we have everyone from every walk of life, every race, creed, religion, everyone's there. And you don't really get the luxury of persecuting someone for their beliefs or who they are, unless they're, a bad person. Unless you treat someone with disrespect, you're not going to receive disrespect a lot of the time. So I have countless friends who are hardcore right conservatives, and they're very religious, and they have their viewpoint on gay rights and gay marriage and stuff like that. But then they're also mentoring lesbian soldiers and mentoring them and helping them get better as soldiers, as people, and try to progress in their career. They don't let that come in because there's no space for that where we work. So that's an aspect I like about where I work, but also, like you were saying with the status quo, the military is very status quo of where it is. At the very high level, they always talk about wanting to change, but down at the bottom level, a lot of the leaders are like, well, that's how it's been and that's how it's always going to be. And I've always been the kind of person that's like, well, how can we make it better? Right? Like it's working now, but would it work better if we did it differently? If we tried to train people to speak to each other with respect versus just barking orders, or if we actually listened to our soldiers' complaints, would that improve the workspace? And I think it's kind of the same thing with our country. I think we should always be striving to improve. You're never good, right? Or at least you're always good. You're never great. You're always trying to find great, and you'll always be trying to reach it because there's always something you could be better at. Olympic athletes, top athletes in the world, top scholars are always trying to learn, always trying to do better because they understand that concept. And I think if we applied that to our socio-political realm, we could be better. But then you always and that's the main conversation, left and the right and the middle. Everyone has their own idea of what great is, right? So it's trying to find that middle ground of understanding, which is difficult. And I think the way to reach that middle ground of understanding and conversation is education. People just aren't educated. They hear what they hear, and they don't understand the other side, so they just kill it. They just cut it off because it's misknowledge is kind of fear to some people, and it's on both sides.
Well, and what's the saddest part of it is that people are not being fair when it comes down to judging someone's opinion or someone's worldview based on the ideas. Now, if you hold a particular worldview, you must be an evil person, or you must be a bigot or a closed-minded person. And I find that very troubling because, we talk about freedom of speech, we talk about this country not persecuting dissidents or reporters or people who are asking questions, but you're easily destroyed and your reputation ruined if you are able to fall into a category that is unaccepted. And on the other side, there's been this push that everybody should be listened to and everybody should be loved and supported unless we disagree with them. And to me, that's it's like a progressive fallacy that there's only so much liberty in that sense. And on the other side, they say, well, if there's true liberty, I can say all the mean, horrible things that I want, and that's my right. So it's a weird balance. Like, how do you push a society to be not only open but also judicious and value driven? Because we've talked about conspiracy theories and people who actually push conspiracy theories that are very destructive. And the expert that I had on, he was like, well, it's America. You can believe and say anything you want. And I'm like, yeah, but if it's instilling hatred and is bringing about destructive elements within our society, shouldn't we fight against it and stop it? And he's like, it's freedom of speech. And I'm like, yeah, but there should be limits on the sense of why should we put up with people who are so destructive that it's not that they just disagree with a certain kind of of lifestyle or certain kind of religion or viewpoint, that they actually are preaching like destruction and annihilation. But people are so sensitive and so radicalized nowadays that if you even criticize somebody's opinion, they assume that you are the most hateful and destructive person because of their experience in the past.
Mhm.
So I know it happens a lot with people that have negative experiences with religion. If they hear someone talk about God or religion in general, all these fears and all these hurts that they've had in the past come up, and they want to shut it down.
I
And
get that one a lot. I get that. I get the other side of that a lot. As a theology student and a future chaplain,
oh, you're
that's what
planning to be a chaplain too?
that's what I'm studying for.
Oh, wow.
Is I'm studying for my master's in divinity, so I can be a chaplain in the military. And so I get that a lot. That other side, and it kind of just feeds in the whole premise of.
Oh, we'll get ready to be challenged because I'm a chaplain myself, and I worked in the VA, and I work in the medical field. But I had a friend who was a military chaplain,
Mhm.
and he was old school. Like he grew up Baptist, and now he was traditionalist Lutheran. And when they came up to the issue of diversity and sensitivity training, he had a lot of problems with that.
Mhm.
And he said, I don't have a problem with individuals or even couples. I just have a problem with being taught and being exposed to the type of information where you have to not only accept and tolerate, you have to embrace people you might not agree with.
Mhm.
And I was like, okay, so you rather keep that in secret? You better rather have people not even talk about it, like it's not even there? And he's like, well, it's like a personal thing. And I'm like, wouldn't you want to know if people hold those views or something? And I'm not gonna get into all the details, but I was just messing with him. This idea that that sensitivity training, and you mentioned it's kind of almost like a workforce um, uh, philosophy.
Mhm.
If people are able to do the work, why do you care what their personal life is? So that, to me, that's a good approach. But if you make it where we have some people from this particular viewpoint, and they're going to come and tell you how to embrace it and celebrate it, maybe that's going a little too far. So equal access does not mean equal sense of acceptance and of participation.
I think that so that kind of breeds into a lot of people's distaste of other sides. If we split it into the one side or the other, it kind of feeds into that because people take as disagreement as intolerance a lot of the time. Like for just a most polarizing topic is like the LGBTQ rights and stuff like that. A lot of people on the right side, a lot of them are like, I don't give a shit who you marry or who you love. Just don't like press it on me, right? Like I don't care what you do, just don't require me to be okay with it. Is all they're trying to say because you can have your own. They're not trying to persecute them. They're not trying to say they can't get married or live their life or be whoever they want to be. They just don't want to be forced to condone it or be a part of it. And then people take that as, oh, you don't agree with me, so you must be, evil, as you were saying earlier. You disagree with a certain side. And then some people on that other side, though, can take it a little farther to the right and take it into hatred. And they think that what they're trying to say is, I just don't agree with it. But behind closed doors, they're going further into persecution and condemning. And in the religious realm, it's a lot of that misunderstanding. And I guess I've kind of learned this new term called like a progressive Christian, where you're kind of you're more towards the other side and it's more accepting. But that's always it kind of goes along with the lines of always trying to learn and always trying to question. as people. We're supposed to question. That's what we're supposed to do. So you should always be questioning it, even when it comes to something as solid ground as religion or faith. When it comes to a lot of people, you should look into apologetics and reconstructionism and try to like learn things rather than just be told things. And that's kind of the take I try to take with a lot of things. Always see the other side and what the other side is trying to say, and then form that into kind of how I am going to continue on.
Because one of the challenges at chaplain school is that they have different views on revelation. Traditional religious people, they believe that scripture or religious texts are the revelation of God. And then there's tradition or rituals that you do or your interpretation of that. And then there's your personal experience. But usually your personal experience has to submit to the institutions and the text because they have greater authority over matters of life. And in the chaplain program that I was part of, it was like the opposite. Your personal experience informs your view of scripture and the way you interpret tradition and biblical interpretation or religious interpretation. And I would always bump heads with my professors because it was again, it was the same thing. Like, why would you push your view on me to make me a better chaplain? Like, you're assuming that someone who has a traditional understanding cannot work in a pluralistic environment. And that is assuming that because you have bad experiences with traditionalist religious people who were closed-minded and bigoted and unable to love and respect other people who were different, that now we have to turn every chaplain into an interfaith minister who follows a New Age style spirituality that is based on whatever feeling or trend is going on. And I guess that I'm being too critical of them. I don't know if you got a chance to look at my previous podcast. We did the one the Shag made an atheist out of me.
Okay.
And
I saw the name, and I that was interesting, and I was going to come back around and try to listen to it because I was like, okay.
It's tongue in cheek because I just thought that book on itself is so poorly written and so problematic. They made us read it because it talked a lot about emotions and then about trauma and the way that people deal with not only their personal experience but their religious background, and how you try to make sense of your life in the midst of being also taught traditionalist views. So it's like a rebellion against traditional views, but then it kind of goes back to it and it kind of throws you off, and it's a mess. So I think that book is dangerous in the sense, from a traditionalist perspective, that just like I think the Bible can be dangerous, that if you have no help, you can go crazy. Like,
well, that's a lot of the thing with the Bible, I guess, is and it comes with anything really, not just Bible, but something. Things are open to interpretation, and people kind of take it and run it. And a lot of the time, they'll read something and they'll interpret it in the way that they're kind of leaning towards anyway, the way that they want it to go, something that kind of fits their script already. And so having someone, something drives me nuts to just continue with the religion thing is when I go to churches and I sit in a service and they just kind of hit the same meat and potatoes that you get in every single service, and they don't go into the history of that topic that they're going into, the why this was there, kind of what led up to it, and what was going on at this time, or take the words and actually translate it over to Greek or Hebrew and be like, well, this is what this word means. And my home pastor does that. He kind of deep delves into it, and he's teaching you as well as catering to you in an emotional level as well. And I've just had pastors that just like they read it and they go for the pure emotional point. And it's back to the education thing. Education is so big to me, it just drives me crazy that people don't want to learn. And I feel like it's something that is especially as important as someone's spiritual faith. Whether you have it or not, it's still a spiritual faith. So whether you're Christian, LDS, Muslim, Hindu, or atheist, that's still a spiritual belief. And something as important as that to someone's core, you should learn about it, I believe. And truly delve into it and always have questions. Because if you're just regurgitating what people are telling you, what are you really doing to kind of better the situation?
Well, and then my issue with that book is I thought that's what you were going to say when you mentioned people just hitting the meat and potatoes. Is like there's a certain narrative that has to be addressed in every Christian movie. So unless you do the four spiritual laws or some like version of the gospel, as evangelicals will call it, is not a Christian movie. So in the Shack, is supposedly is a Christian movie, but I felt that it actually it tears down Christianity and then it tries to build it back up. But you're so shocked on the way that they tore it up that it doesn't even fit anymore. And that's the problem. Like any form of art that is secluded to those specific rules, like you have to hit these 4 points, or if not, it's not sufficient or it's not acceptable. It's limiting. So that's kind of part of the issue with modern spirituality, that either is too concrete or not concrete enough, or not giving people the opportunity to think and develop their own answers. It was hitting too many answers and like,
not presenting enough questions, really.
It was case closed. Like, this is how it is. And it was every topic under the sun. But I feel that today's show can be about that because it's all connected. So as you are becoming a military chaplain and me doing chaplaincy about the veteran affair and other hospitals, it goes back to the thing about being able to communicate and to share in someone's experience. So what I tell people when they say, well, how does this chaplaincy thing work? You have someone who is ordained or endorsed by their denomination or religion, and then they go out and work with people from all different backgrounds. How does that work? And some people take it to mean that you're all things to all people, to the point of actually, like, there was a guy who's like,
they think you're actually performing like Hebrew rituals, or you're actually like doing like if you're Christian, you're doing communion, like for Catholic rituals. Like I've had that same question where they think that you're putting on multiple hats.
Well, I'll tell you two different versions of that. And to me, one makes sense and the other one doesn't make sense. So one guy claimed he was a chaplain at a hospital. He claimed that he was able to perform Hindu weddings and Wiccan funerals. And he was run-through-the-mill Christian. And then one of the doctors that I work with told me that when he was in Vietnam as a medic, there was a Jewish chaplain who had Friday night services for Jews, Saturday services for Protestants, and Sunday services for Catholics.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, so if you're at a wartime scenario and the only person that's available, because one chaplain for 500 soldiers, from what I remember, and you have people that need their faith to get them through, I see that as an honor and a great thing to say, hey, let's pick up the prayer book from whatever religion and find things that people find comfort in and help them through it. And some people might have a problem with the Jewish chaplain doing a Catholic service or a Protestant service, but there's a shared heritage that we can all draw from. But to be a Christian, and there's many definitions of what a Christian is, and then venture out and perform a ritual. And I had in one of our trainings, someone said, well, it's not that you're not qualified to do a Hindu wedding, it's that do you feel comfortable doing a Hindu wedding? And I'm like, you can feel comfortable doing anything, but it doesn't mean that you know what you're doing.
Yeah, it's almost offensive that you could think that you could try and do it without like the proper education on the fact, really.
The thing is, some of my most meaningful visits have been with people from other faiths when you find a common ground. Like, if you're going out of your way, like there was a guy with a guitar that he would play Jewish songs and Christian songs and Hare Krishna songs, and to me that was like a joke, because it was it went back to like, if your view of religion is of something sacred, and then someone comes from the outside and they stumble through it, it's not sacred anymore. Now it's just the religion of the day. But if they truly honor that you have a different perspective, but in the human sense they connect with you, if they come in and they hear you and they listen to your concerns and they help you make sense of something, to me that is more beautiful and more meaningful than someone coming and saying the right rituals because they know you're this or because you know you're that. And I think that that's the element of, again, we go back to different philosophies. So in postmodernism, all views are the same. And in whatever other philosophical perspective, you can have the different views have different importance based on your own perspective. Like you can say, I believe my religion is true without destroying everybody else around you, because it goes back to you have a sense of confirmation within yourself. But people are not going to feel threatened if you're not a jerk about it. If you have strong convictions and your convictions lead you to be a chaplain, to provide love and support for people who are suffering, no one's going to say you need to stop believing what you believe and you need to just go with the wind. And that's what people don't understand. Like, there are people who become interfaith ministers and they study all world religions. But just like, you know, in medicine, and I know in communication or social service or whatever, if you try to do a million things, you won't do any of them right.
Yeah.
So a friend of mine said, well, there's this program where I can become an ambassador for all faiths. And I want to know about Islam, and I want to know about Judaism, I want to know about Christianity. And I'm like, that's fantastic, but I would tell you to stick to the one that you feel connected to, because each religion is so vast that you can drown in your own knowledge of it. But if you start venturing out, it's like, I want to know Hinduism really well, and I want to know Islam really well. You want to know everything. You might not know any of them well, and you know just bits and pieces. And you're always going to be humbled when you run into a family who has been part of that religion for a long time, or they have a deep understanding of it. If you don't realize that, again, the rituals, the traditions are holy and special, and when an outsider comes, they have to come again in humility, and we become humbled in our own faith, in our own tradition, to the point of sometimes we don't even we realize we don't know as much as we think we know, and there's so much to learn. So I think, like, I wish we could start like a association of traditionalist chaplains, or chaplains who see the world from that perspective, as compared to using all these psychoanalysis and postmodern ideas, where then it becomes kind of meaningless. Because that's what I felt was being fed to me, is kind of like, you think you have all the answers, you're wrong, we have all the answers, and the answer is to become New Age. And I'm like, come on, man. So then why even like allow for someone to go through their own tradition, to get endorsed, and then have good standing, if all that stuff is meaningless? What I need to do is put all my views in the front door and come in as an open spirit that can be swayed whatever way for the sake of helping someone. It's like, I wouldn't be able to do this kind of work if I didn't have a foundation and a strong sense of what I believe that would carry me through in the midst of all those very difficult experiences.
I mean, my goal as as a chaplain is to, and it's the same reason as to why I became a medic. It's to help people. And I love my faith, and I've been a worship pastor for the past, 12 years in various different churches, and a youth pastor at my last duty station before Germany. And so I love delving into it, and that's what kind of pushed me into doing it to further my career. And my goal as a chaplain is to not be a master of all things. It's to kind of be a jack of all trade when it comes to different religions, because I would never perform a Hindu wedding, or try to do a Jewish or even really kind of a Catholic service, because I'm Assemblies of God, Protestant Christian. So that I wouldn't even feel comfortable doing it. And like I said, I feel like it's almost offensive for me to think that I could. But I would definitely want anyone to feel comfortable coming to me, because that's my job. With some units, you could end up having 1,200 soldiers underneath you. But most posts have enough chaplains to where they're all different. So at my last post over in Germany, I was a part of the Protestant service, leading worship there. And then right after us was Catholic service. And that was an entirely different chaplain altogether. And for a while, it was actually a civilian German Catholic priest from off post. He would come on and teach it because they didn't have any military Catholic priests. And then they have Muslim services over at another place on post by a Muslim chaplain. So they always try to provide that. But sometimes when you're in a deployed setting, you're the only person. And so if someone comes to me with spiritual, problems or questions, and they may be Hindu or even Wiccan, then I have to either just try to find that common ground, which I would want to try to do anyway, but try to ultimately outsource it so they can get the best help that they can. And I find that it's always important to try to find common ground and to let people know initially right off the bat that you are understanding that you're just there to help. That's what our job is. And regardless of what your faith, it may contradict or be a completely other thing than mine, it's still your faith. And just as if I wouldn't want you to come at me and tell me that my faith is incorrect, I'm not going to do the same to you. I'm just going to try to help you do what you need to do so you can carry on. And I think just trying to have that sense of understanding is the important part of wanting to be a chaplain versus a pastor or a minister, because you have your people around you as a pastor, and they're coming to you because of that faith. As a chaplain, someone's coming to you because they just need guidance. And some people, like many of my friends that I worked with, they were atheists or agnostic. And they would come and talk to me, and they knew that they could come talk to me, and I would not bring up my faith whatsoever. I would just talk to them. And sometimes I would bring my faith into it, but real sneaky like. If you just take out the main key words, a lot of the parables are just philosophies. They're parables. That's what they are. They're stories. And a lot of, Psalms, if you take the main key religious words out, they're just goals and mottos to live by. So if you have someone like that, you can still pastor to them and preach to them, but in a way that they understand. And I think it's opening doors is the important part. You're opening a door and opening thought.
So one of the concerns of having a very liberal president or socialist or whatever they end up being is that it's going to become a culture of, again, free for all. Mm-hmm. So people who don't hold true to their philosophy or their view are going to be subjected to participate in it. And both of us work for the government. I work for the government under Medicare, and you work for the government under the military. So if the government passes a law that there's certain things you have to do as a member of pluralistic society, you're bound to that, and your job is at stake. It would be different if you were just an Assemblies of God pastor at a church. You're under the bylaws of your church only. But if you are a chaplain, now you're under the laws of the people who are paying your bills.
So
So
for military chaplains, actually, we do follow under just our endorsement. So for pure military chaplains, not contracted military chaplains like yourself working with the VA, I fall under Assemblies of God. So let's say myself, I don't really have a problem with LGBTQ people. My church and my endorsement may. So if someone comes to me with that inclination and they want help and it's against my endorsement, I have 100% that right to be like, hey, I can't help you, but I will push you towards this person that can help you. And even though in the Army, it's a completely 100% tolerance rule, right? There is no discrimination except for that one thing. And it's not really discrimination. It's full encompassment of understanding, because they understand that just like you can't condemn and discriminate against that person, they can't expect you to break what makes you what your job is because of that open acceptance. So
check this out. During the Nazi regime, there was Protestant and Catholic chaplains in the field with those bastards, and they were performing mass and Protestant services and blessing them while they were like torturing and genocidally killing tons of people. And I think there's one book about that, and I was trying to go to a presentation about it, but it's unbelievable that there was this type of mentality that everybody was going along with whatever the government was deciding. And no, there's only like, I always talk about how there was one guy and maybe another 10 people who backed them up, who stood against the other Protestant churches and the other Catholics, because they were so enmeshed with the government rationale for their hatred and their destruction. So at that point, you would think that people would be like, well, I don't really want to go into that town and pillage the place and then keep going and praying and doing services. So I think that there is a healthy skepticism and a healthy division that has to be between your convictions, your religious tradition, and whatever the government or the military is trying to do. Because how are we ever going to keep our humanity intact? And the reason that I brought up that is because one of the fears, like I was saying, with a super progressive government, is that there's going to be a shaming of people that don't want to participate in certain things, and a dismissal of people who are not going to embrace that type of mentality. And then it can go the other way, where if you have a very right-wing system, that the people who are discriminatory and are hateful are given a priority over the people who are more embracing, and then people don't feel comfortable joining the military or participating in government functions because they feel that there's a culture. So maybe there is not like a law or a rule that discriminates them, but there is a culture of dismissiveness. So
no, it's definitely that, and a lot of people feel that way with just being female in the military, and at least just with the military itself. And I'm kind of you can relate this to just politics overall. People have what they think that side is, right? So if someone who had never really been around military, they've only been around a few people, they all think that we're hardened badasses ready to go fight wars, and we're experts, and that's what we are. We're soldiers. You know how many goofy people and how many ridiculous, unqualified guys I know in the military? A lot of them can't shoot a rifle to save their life, and I hope to God they don't actually deploy, because it's going to be rough, and they're a gunner, so good luck. right? And I know medics that can't do their job. And so we're not all experts. And a lot of people just think that we're like good old country boys, which I would like to think of myself as, but many of my friends aren't. And sometimes people are afraid of that persecution. And I think as much as people worried about that joining the military or any other group, right, going into law enforcement or firefighting or anything like that as a first responder, people generally think of it as like a boys club. So females generally don't want to go into it, or transgender people, because it's that boys club mentality and they don't want to kind of step into that realm where it's going to be harder for them. But I think it's important to have that open understanding, like you were saying. And the key word that I got from what you said just a few minutes ago was compassion. I think that's the main thing. People overlook it, and we're in a culture of a lack of compassion and understanding. If people had more compassion for each other and more of ability of being of empathy, putting themselves in those other people's shoes and understanding, we would be in a much better place just as a society. If people would be like, that I'm yelling at that person because they're infringing on me. But if they just took a step back, they would realize that in their act of yelling at that person for infringing upon them, they're doing the same thing. And I think there's a lack of like being able to visibly see our hypocrisy and our double standards that we're creating for ourselves and others, and a extreme lack of compassion.
Well, and we deviated from the subject that we wanted to discuss on the show, but I think it's important for both of us as people who work serving others to have that communication about what are the things that we all agree on, like you say, compassion, humanity, values. That's like, for me, the reason that I make a big deal about being an American and not just a Mexican who moved here is that there's certain values, there's certain laws and systems in this country that work and are meant to keep us engaged in the process of civility and even righteousness to a certain point. Like, one of my pet peeves with progressives is they paint the situation as so not so bleak that we have spread ourselves too thin around the world. We've started 7 or 8 wars. We've gotten involved in all types of shady deals with dictators and double dictators and stuff like that. And they portray this country as this very destructive empire. And then on the other side, you have people who paint America as this beneficent, beautiful, democratic project that is spreading, goodwill and righteousness around the world. And to me, it's like anything that I've ever encountered, it can be corrupted. So the only way that you can keep a country healthy, for it not to become destructive, or if you want to live in La La Land where you assume that your views are better than everybody else's, because that's another thing that they throw at America. It's like, who are we to push democracy in the Middle East? Who are we to talk about? It's funny, they say, who are we to push democracy? But they never say, who are we to push equality? And who are we to push, self, valuing people from the other gender and financial freedom and stuff like that? They never question that. They question democracy. But you can't have those without democracy. So, and that would be the difference between a democratic socialist and a regular socialist, or an authoritarian socialist. That there are many countries in the world that are democratic, and they use the means of production as a socialist thing, where they work with the companies or whatever the capitalist, the opposite of capitalism is. But this idea that for all those values to thrive, you need a government that allows for those things and that it supports those things. When they were passing the Civil Rights Act, without the government that had both the military and the federal forces at their disposal, they cannot ensure the safety of the African Americans going into the unsegregated schools and for people to fully integrate.
Mm-hmm.
If it would have been just like, go ahead and integrate, without that, it would never happen. So the rule of law, the democratic aspect that people actually voted for that, or that the president pushed it and he didn't have any pushback, like all the things that have made America great is the ability for these values to thrive and to affect all of us. The reason that Mexico, that is a democratic country and has been around longer than the US, 250 years longer, the reason that it's in chaos is because those values have never been able to fully be integrated into society, because the society, even though they broke away from the Spanish kingdom, they brought in all the racism, all the sexism, and all the very destructive forces that were alive during the Spanish caste system.
Mm-hmm.
And they've never dealt with their hatred of indigenous people. They've never dealt with their dismissal of mestizos who are from both races. They never dealt with inequality at all. So it's been brooding for these years and has become more and more corrupt and more destructive. So I love America because we have the ability to challenge each other. We have the ability to go on one side and see if it works, and then jump on the other side and try it that way, and have that ongoing discussion and conversation within ourselves that keep pushing and pulling and making the society better as it goes. And I hope that we can share that with other parts of the world, and that people can look deeper than just our movies and just our TV shows and our music and stuff like that, and actually embrace the ideals that have been refined throughout the years in this country.